Chapter 11. Will we see you again soon, Peter? Amory blinked across the dark room. She saw Ellen, too, peering into the same narrow wooden box in surprise. There was no one in the casket at all. Instead, it seemed to be stuffed with folded blankets and articles of clothing. Peter soon began to lift things out and distribute them to the silent people in the room. He handed heavy coats to the man and the wife, and another one to the old man with a beard. "It'll be very cold," he murmured. "Put them on." He found a thick sweater for Mrs. Rosen and a woolen jacket for Ellen's father. After a moment of rummaging through the folded things, he found a smaller winter jacket and handed it to Ellen. Emery watched as Ellen took the jacket in her arms and looked at it. It was patched and worn. It was true that there had been few clothes for anyone during the recent years, but still, Ellen's mother had always managed to make clothes for her daughter, often using old things that she was able to take apart and refashion in a new way, and made them seem brand new. Never had Ellen worn anything so shabby and so old. But she put it on, pulled it around her, and buttoned the mismatched buttons. Peter, his arms full of odd pieces of clothing, looked towards the silent couple with the infant. "I'm sorry," he said to them. "There's nothing for the baby." "I'll find something," Mamma said quickly. "The baby must be warm." She left the room and was back in a moment with Christie's thick red sweater. "Here," she said softly to the mother. "It will be much too big, but it will make it even warmer for him." The woman spoke for the first time. "Her," she whispered. "She's a girl. Her name is Rachel." Mamma smiled and helped her direct the sleeping baby's arm into the sleeves of the sweater. Together they buttoned the heart-shaped buttons. How Christy loved that sweater with the heart buttons. Until the tiny child was completely encased in the warm red wool. Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't wake. Peter reached into his pocket and took something out. He went to the parents and leaned forward to the baby. He opened the lid of the small bottle in his hand. "How much does she weigh?" Peter asked. "She weighs 7 pounds when she was born," the young woman replied. "She's gained a little, but not very much. Maybe she weighs 8 pounds now, no more. A few drops will be enough then. It has no taste. She won't even notice." The mother tightened her arms around the baby. She looked up at Peter, pleading. "Please, no," she said. "She's always sleeps all night. Please. She doesn't need it. I promise she won't cry." Peter's voice was firm. "We can't take the chance," he said. He inserted the dropper of the bottle into the baby's tiny mouth and squeezed a few drops of liquid into her tongue. The baby yawned, swallowed, and the mother closed her eyes. Her husband gripped her shoulder. Next, Peter removed the folded blankets from the coffin. One by one, he handed them around. "Carry these with you," he said. "You will need them later for warmth." Amory's mother moved around the room and gave each person a small package of food, of cheese and bread and apples, and Amory had helped her prepare in the kitchen the hours before. Finally, Peter took a paper-wrapped packet from the inside of his own jacket. He looked around the room and assembled people now, dressed in bulky winter clothing, and motioned to Mr. Rosen, who followed him to the hall. Amory could overhear the conversation. "Mr. Rosen," Peter said, "I must get this to Henrik, but I might not see him. I'm going to take the others out only to the harbor, and they will go to the boat alone. I want you to deliver this without fail. It is of great importance." There will be a moment of silence in the hall, and Amory knew that Peter must be giving a packet to Mr. Rosen. Amory could see it protruding from Mr. Rosen's pocket when he returned to the room and sat down again. She could see, too, that Mr. Rosen had a puzzled look on his face. He didn't know what the packet contained, and he hadn't asked. It was one more time Amory realized that they protected each other by not telling. If Mr. Rosen knew, he might be frightened. If Mr. Rosen knew, he might be in danger. So he hadn't asked, and Peter hadn't explained. "Now," Peter said, looking at his watch, "I will lead the first group. You, and you." And he gestured to the old man and the young people with the baby. "Inga," he said. Amory realized that was the first time he'd ever heard Peter Nielsen call her mother, by her first name. Before, it had always been Mrs. Johansson, or in the old days, during the merriment and excitement of his engagement to Lisa, it had occasionally been Mama. Now it was Inga. It was as if he moved beyond his own youth and had taken a place in the world of adults. Her mother nodded and waited for instructions. You wait 20 minutes and then bring the Rosens. Don't come sooner. We must be separate on the path, so there's less chance of being seen. Mrs. Johansson nodded again. Come directly back to the house after you've seen the Rosens safely to Henrik. Stay in the shadows and in the back of the path. You know that, of course. By the time you get to the Rosens to the boat, Peter went on, I will be gone. As soon as I deliver my group, I must move on. There's much work to be done tonight. He turned to Amory, so I will say goodbye to you now. Amory went to him and gave him a hug. But will we see you again soon? She asked. I hope so, Peter said. Very soon. Don't grow much more, or you will be taller than I am, little long legs. Amory smiled, but Peter's comment was no longer light-hearted as fun of the past. It was only a brief grasp of something that had gone. Peter kissed Mamma wordlessly. Then he wished the Rosens Godspeed, and then he led the others through the door. Mamma, Amory, and the Rosens sat in silence. There was a slight commotion outside the door, and Mamma went quickly to look out. In a moment, she was back. It's all right, she said, in response to their looks. The old man stumbled, but Peter helped him up. He didn't seem to be hurt, maybe just his pride, she added, smiling a bit. It was an odd word, pride. Amory looked at the Rosens sitting there, wearing misshapen, ill-fitting clothing, holding ragged blankets folded in their arms, their faces drawn and tired. She remembered earlier, happier times, Mrs. Rosen, her hair neatly combed and covered, lighting the Sabbath candle and the ancient prayer, and Mr. Rosen sitting at the big chair of the living room, studying his thick books, correcting papers, adjusting his glasses, looking up now and then to complain about good-naturedly about the lack of decent light. She remembered Ellen in the school play, moving confidently across the stage, her gestures sure, her voice clear. All of the things, those sources of pride, those candlesticks, the books on the daydreams of the theater had been left behind in Copenhagen. They had nothing with them now. There was only the clothing of an unknown people for warmth, the food from Henrik's mother, or Henrik's farm for survival, and the dark path ahead through the woods to freedom. Anne-Marie realized, though she had not really been told, that Uncle Henrik was going to take them in his boat across the sea to Sweden. She knew how frightened Mrs. Rosen was of the sea, its width, its depth, its cold. She knew how frightened Ellen was of the soldiers, with their guns and their boat and their boots. They were certainly looking for them, and she knew how frightened they all must be of the future. But their shoulders were straight, as they had been in the past, in the classroom, on the stage, or at the Sabbath table. So there were other sources, too, of pride, and they had not left everything behind.